Hello and welcome to the Project Syndicate studio sessions from High House at the COP30 site in Belém, Brazil, in partnership with FES. From where we are here today in Belém to Belgrade and Bangkok, wherever you go in the world, opinion polls consistently show that dealing with climate change is one of people's top political priorities. And since politicians, on the whole, tend to like being popular, then logically it should be a green light for radical global climate action. But that, of course, is not quite the case. When faced with policies that are seen to be expensive, inconvenient, or even a culture war issue, voters often become less keen and quite quickly. So how do we square that circle? I'm delighted to be joined today by Carlos Alvarado-Quesada, former president of Costa Rica and member of Club de Madrid, and Natalie Unterstell, president of the Talanoa Institute and member of the COP30 Presidency's Adaptation Council. Welcome to you both.
Thanks for having us.
Carlos, let me start with you, because as president of Costa Rica, you were known for policies really driving the decarbonisation of the economy. But what I'm wondering is, were there moments where you pulled back? Were there times where you thought, I would like to do more, but it's just not going to play?
Well, I think that's the case. And that was the case back in 2019. And I think I'll share this example with, it might shed some light to what's going on. 2019, we launched the first decarbonization plan of the planet after the Paris agreements in Costa Rica. And it was a great plan. I can say I'm very proud of it. It actually showed the way for Costa Rica and for others to come. But if I want to share what I will do different with experience, I'll start with the name. Because it's not about decarbonization. It's about the people. And that's perhaps what we have been missing throughout this journey. At the end of the day, that decarbonization yields results for the people, for the environment. It creates jobs. It improves quality air. It improves transportations. But the way we have been framing it, it's putting the focus on the problem, on carbon. Obviously, there's a lot of deal to do with that. Yeah. But at the end of the day, we're doing that not for carbon itself. We're doing it to improve the livelihoods of the people. And we've been missing the capacity to connect the dots. And that's why many people feel very alienated by the topic. They say, what's in it for me? And one of the key insights is we need to do the effort to connect what we do here at COP with public policy and how it connects with everyday life and livelihoods of people.
I mean, I completely see what you're saying in terms of the framing of the debate as a win rather than a problem. But there are sometimes trade-offs. And I guess, are there times when we don't have policies that are a win-win? Where does the resistance come from? What is it that voters are particularly resistant to, do you think?
Well, I do believe there's resistance, and a normal resistance to change, transformation. Let's say the energy transition. We strongly advocate, for example, for phasing out fossil fuels because they are the root of the problem. But we also need to take into account that many livelihoods for people in Nigeria, in Brazil, in Mexico, in Saudi Arabia, many livelihoods are connected to fossil fuels yet. So if we are not able to trace that transformation, that people can see themselves in the picture, not as losers, but as part of a journey that's going to improve everybody's life, it's going to be very hard because they're going to see themselves as losers on the process. So I do believe what we have been lacking is that empathetic capacity to do partnerships, to demonstrate the way, okay, you're a community that produces coal, that's not sustainable anymore. But what's your role in the future for you and your children in this process? And there are some good experiences, but we generally have been very bad at tracing that route. So it's another level of the game. It requires lots of partnership, lots of creativity, lots of incentives. This is when there are some market failures, governments have to step in to create incentives. So what appears when there is a win-win scenario, excellent. Sustainable energies is one example because sometimes or many times are cheaper. They create jobs. That's why there's this race to dominate the industrial policies around sustainability in sustainable energy. But in the cases where that transition has some negative, that's the moment when governments, public finance, and even private finance has to step in to mitigate that and allow it to. But that requires vision, and that requires money, and that requires leadership. It's not going to happen without intentionality.
Natalie, how much is this about leadership?
Everything is about leadership. I think we won't get out of the climate crisis with the same leadership model that brought us to where we are now, right? And I think what we've been seeing in the past years is that, for instance, the Paris Agreement was very much rooted in a theory of change, that if we change the economics of climate change, we would get the politicians on board, right? And we were partly successful because the renewables become so cheap. They are much cheaper now than most fossil fuels in most countries, right? And so, yes, the economic sectors, they join the race. They are deploying renewables everywhere. But the uptake by the politicians has not been that successful, right? And the electorate also, I think it's a little bit confused about, is this good for me, right? So I think we are still to shape up a new leadership model where the two things will combine. And one of the areas where I think it's where there are trade-offs and we have to deal with them in a different way is the subsidies, but for the consumers. Most of the riots or the social unrest we've seen in the world in the past 10, 15 years related to climate change, they were, for instance, in France, we had the Yellow Jackets. They were fighting for, 10, 20 cents of increase in the transportation fees, right? In Brazil, we had a similar issue. And so people hear about carbon or decarbonization policies, carbon markets, and they say, I'm going to be the one paying for this. But we are already paying for the climate inaction. We know it's about $7 trillion that is going to the industry at the moment because we are not doing enough. So it's difficult for people to grasp.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely. And it's that point of people paying for it. And I think it might be, I would love to hear what you think, that people don't always know what they are getting in return. And people don't understand that where we are now compared to a decade ago is a much better place in terms of the projections on global warming. It's not job done, but we've moved pre-Paris from a scenario where it was potentially over 5 degrees of heating from pre-industrial levels, which would have been catastrophic. Antonio Guterres at the beginning of COP says that if countries' promises are true, we're down to 2.3, which is it's a huge difference. But I don't think necessarily that's articulated. If you look at the opinion polling evidence, there's a sense that politicians don't really do anything and there's no real action and that nothing is changing. And I'm not sure necessarily the climate community is getting that message across to people. So there is that cost, but people don't necessarily see what they're getting in return. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I do believe we need to elevate the level of our game in political terms at that stage. We need to learn from the lessons of the recent past. I do believe there's a lot to learn, and I'm so glad Natalie is an expert on adaptation. A lot to learn from adaptation, because we have focused a lot on mitigation. And mitigation sometimes for the citizen, it's emissions, it's who's responsible of that. I only have my house. I did not create this problem, but now it's on my services. But when you go to adaptation, it's very clear. Adaptation is about heat, extreme heat, and adaptation is not theoretical. It's on your block. It's on your neighborhood. So what is it the mayor going to do about extreme heat? What is it the coastal community is going to do about sea level rise? Because that's going to affect our livelihoods. What's going to happen with drought and farming? It's not only a rural problem, it's the supply of food for the big cities. What's going to happen with floodings? And we see floodings happen. What's going to happen with fires? So on the adaptation part, citizens are waiting for responses. And you can be a left wing or right wing, a center politician. You need to respond to your constituencies locally to phenomena created by climate change. You can believe or not in climate change. That's another question. But you're going to feel the extreme heat, the floodings you're going to experience. So there's this connection, more the proximity of adaptation connected to this. There's lots of insights that we need to do while executing, bringing the attention to empowering and enable communities to confront climate change as well. And from there, we can also take lessons, draw lessons, and make people not only believe in, but care about these other dimensions of the problem. Going back to mitigations, I see a lot of, I want to say hope on that, because it's very real and it's becoming way more real. I mean, if you talk about climate-driven natural disasters, every country has examples of it. Every country suffers, and every politician, either because they want to serve, which is what I believe, or either because they want to get reelected, have to address that. So there's lots of learning on that dimension, and I think it'll be wise, not only locally, but globally, also to turn our attention to adaptation.
Natalie, love to hear from you on adaptation. A member of the COP30 Adaptation Council. What are your thoughts here?
I think we've been counting, as Carlos mentioned, the progress on the climate crisis in terms of tons of carbon reduction for a long time. And of course, we had to do it. But I think people are now facing the problem. It's here. It's not a futuristic thing. It's not about happening just in some countries. It's happening everywhere, right? And so we are changing, not to not count carbon emissions anymore, but to do that and count who is protected, who is not protected, who is leading to really protect people, so on and so forth. So there is a change. And for a lot of people, it's still difficult because they say, is this like surrendering? Are we talking about giving up here? No, it's just the opposite. We cannot move forward and respond to the climate crisis if we do not adapt. For the transition, we need adaptation. We've seen so many examples in Latin America and so on. So I think this is the connection that is missing currently. And I really hope that at COP30, we see something politically and financially significant coming out for adaptation in all parts of the world.
Let me ask you both. The premise of this discussion is that voters want strong action on climate. Obviously, Donald Trump has taken the view that that is not what voters want to see. And it is a trend that you do see now, different to 3 or 4 years ago, where in several major democracies around the world, there is a trend coming through on this sort of rhetoric. What do you both think about that?
Let me answer with an anecdote. I have a friend, an acquaintance, and his business is renewables and renewable energy in the state of Texas in the United States. And he will say, my sales pitch is not green energy, and I don't talk to my workforce in terms of green works. I just talk to my constituency in terms of cheaper, cleaner energy. And he's got a thriving business. You will say it's about framing. It's about, at the end of the day, the voter cares about very fundamental things, about the bills they have to pay, about doing the right thing, about their neighborhood. I mean, extreme heat affects you regardless of your ideology or the quality of the air. So I think perhaps in the environmental movement, we have to bring back the discussion to that dimension. We went several feet on the air talking about 1.5, talking about emission, carbon credits, a jargon that most of the citizens, basically, it's not in their daily base life. Yeah. And it ends up being very polarizing because as a politician, if you speak like that, many people will say, basically, you don't care about me. You're talking an alien language. Yeah. So we have to take back with love and empathy and say, I care about you and I care about what you care. So it's changing a little bit the game on the level of politics again, but bringing it back to people.
Yeah, absolutely. Natalie, let me ask you, because we were talking about climate change being one of people's top concerns. And if you look at people's other top concerns, they would be things like the economy or immigration. And on those subjects, people can very easily understand at least some of the debate and have a view about part of what is happening. Is it a problem that in climate, actually the debate takes place with all the terms that we're talking about, which people throw around in COP, NDCs, Article 6? I mean, if you're not a bit of a climate geek, it's very hard to understand the climate conversation. How much of an issue is that, do you think?
First of all, I think we have a very good economic case. So maybe people don't even need to know that this is good for the planet because they know it's good for them, right? So they will have cheaper, safer, more accessible energy, for instance. I hope that becomes the case for food and for other goods and services that we consume anytime soon. We are not there yet. But I think the issue is also like that people, they are connecting somehow to the economic case of the solutions, but they're not connecting with the emotions because the climate community is not selling good emotions. We are talking about doomism. We're talking about the end of things, right? And people get really frustrated. They are fearful of the future, especially the youth. And I think this is kind of making, the lives of those in the fossil fuel industry much easier because for them, that's good. Just let's continue with what we have, business as usual. So I think there's a change, or maybe we have to combine, the economic case with the, let's say, emotional case for climate change so that people will, relate differently and will get more courageous instead of more fearful of the climate, of the solutions.
Yeah, that's it. Because there are very strong emotions, just like you're saying around climate, but they do tend to be fear and anxiety, and also sometimes quite a lot of finger pointing and accusations at people. And it's that positivity and the framing of it all, I think, is something that's really coming through in the conversation. Let me, though, ask you about COP30, because it has been suggested that this COP is smaller. We have 10,000 fewer delegates than last year in Baku. We had, I think, 56, 57 world leaders coming here. It was over 100 in Baku, 150 in Dubai. Is that a sign that some of the political enthusiasm is waning from governments, or that they're more cautious about seeing themselves aligned with COP and the climate movement? Or is it in fact down to some of the practicalities of Belém, the accommodation, the length of the flights and so on? Carlos, you must have attended many COPs as a world leader. What do you think?
I do believe, some of those are, you can have many factors coinciding in one same reality. I do believe because of the geopolitical context we're transitioning. And it's a moment in which one major player, the United States, is not present. So that brings a level of uncertainty. So somehow it's expected to see what's the outcome, to see how the world managed to respond without that actor that's one of the major economies. Even that being said, I remain with healthy doses of optimism. Why? Well, one thing, and I have been supporting that actively, is the initiative of the TFFF, the facility on forests, which is innovating in Brazil, and the tropical forests have been pushing. I think that's critical for the planet, and that has an advancement. So I'm optimistic about that. I also think that many of the governments are being cautious in testing the waters. But, and listening also to what Natalie was saying, there's also a phenomenon that's also been unleashed. Even though we are off track on times and we need to accelerate to lower the curves, but regardless of the jargon of the science and because of the science, if we don't curve the temperature, it's going to be very harsh future, and that's a fact. But the trend of renewables and on the energy transition has not become a discussion about only doing the right thing for the planet, has become a competition to own those industries. So there's also an incentive there, and that comes with the discussion from solar panels to critical minerals, even to the semiconductor industry. So there's there an incentive to accelerate that. And that itself puts a lot of pressure on the fossil fuel producers to eventually do a transition and to diversify. We want it to be faster because we need it to be faster, but at least that element has been unleashed. We see obviously one of the other big players, China, having a big say on that, in action, India as well. So there are some elements that point in that direction. I do believe that as we are in that juncture, COP30 is, let's say, that moment of transition. We obviously we always want this big cup that delivers an ultimate result, but I think it's a process. We have to see it within a process. So I think we're in the middle of it.
Yeah. Natalie, your reaction?
I think many world leaders are afraid of the bad news that we are dangerously close to the 1.5 tipping point. And that's bad news. So who wants to be to be responsible for that, right? And on the other hand, now it's the moment of truth, which is what President Lula has been saying about this COP, the moment of facing those who are the major responsible, right? The fossil fuel industry, the other industries that are not decarbonizing. So I think they are also afraid in a different way, but they are afraid, and maybe that played into not having as many leaders here, or even like seeing their commitments, the new NDCs coming on time and being ambitious. Only 2 NDCs are aligned with 1.5. So I think that's a very clear picture.
Yeah, so it's slightly awkward, you think, perhaps, for leaders to be here because they haven't necessarily come good.
They would face the marches and the people, the protests, the demonstrations, right? Because even if there aren't so many leaders and delegates inside the blue zone, right? We see a lot of people in the streets. We saw yesterday here, for instance. So I think it's the moment of truth and a moment of facing this climate reality gap of people, for citizens. It doesn't matter if we are much better than 10 years ago. What matters is that right now we are almost at 1.5, right? So this is the issue.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, might be hard for the viewers to understand, but we're in the green zone at the moment, which is the part of COP that is open to the public. And outside the studio here, it is absolutely buzzing. You really feel the energy here, which is kind of unlike any COP I've seen before. So perhaps in the diplomatic part over in the blue zone, it might be a bit flat. Certainly, here the public opinion is very strong. I guess on that final point for you both, this is obviously Latin America's COP. In terms of how these issues play out in Latin America as opposed to the rest of the world, what's particular about this region, do you think?
Well, there are many things that are singular to the region. One, Latin America holds lots of the tropical forests in Amazonia, so it's critical for all the planet. I mean, the forest got a territory, but systemically affects everyone through the planet. So that's very important of Latin America. Also, Latin America is a net exporter of food to the world. So we produce food not only for our region, but to feed others elsewhere. Also, it's one of the most decarbonized in terms of electricity, renewable. We are advanced as a region, but also we are a region that's has had a huge gap of inequality. And inequality in some of the technologies. So many of the solutions regarding environment and climate change are within Latin America, not exclusively, but at large. Tropical forest, ocean conservation, food security for now and the future. And I think sometimes it's one of the blind spots as a region. I mean, it's a key for solutions, critical minerals as well. So I think that that is something that we can contribute. And sometimes it's not as much in the debate as I believe it should.
Natalie.
I would just add to what Carlos said that I think we are a region that has been very fragmented politically for quite a long time, right? We have different ideologies, different views, but we shared resources and we also shared the risks and the problems. So it's interesting to see how this process of coming to Belém sort of started to unite a little bit better the region, at least in the negotiations. We're seeing a movement even to, maybe create a group for Latin America, something that we've never had. You say the Arab group, the African group. Maybe we're going to see coming out of here a Latin American group. So I think this is positive. And also the adaptation and resilience agenda is the shared agenda for the region, uniting Central America, South America, and even the Caribbean. So I think I'm very positive about how we're going to look like after this COP.
Fantastic. A great note to end the discussion on. Thank you both very much for your time.
Obrigada.
Now, that's all we have time for today. You have been watching the Project Syndicate studio sessions at High House in partnership with FES. Thank you.